Hi. Stonehell is one of my favorite mega dungeons, and it's perfect for Shadowdark. In fact, I've been seeing it discussed on Discord, Reddit, on Facebook even. It's having a bit of a revival in popularity. And today we're going to talk about Stonehell, this quirky mega dungeon from 2009, but more importantly, why it should be on your radar. And one of the coolest things about it to me, it's like a time capsule back to an earlier style of play. The first hop is from today back to the early OSR, but then it hops you even back to the 1970s. And this is one of the best examples of a published mega dungeon. And here's what we'll cover today, a complete introduction to the concept. So what is the definition of a mega dungeon if you're new? Where did Stonehell come from? How has it held up? And what kind of advice do I have on how to run it? I ran it back in 2012, a few years after it came out, and it's always been on the top of my bucket list to run again. So if that sounds good, that's what we'll talk about today. Welcome to my channel. I'm John. This is a place I like to talk about Shadowdark, the OSR, old school D&D. I provide ref advice, and we talk about TSR type stuff. The first question to really answer is, so what is this mega dungeon term of which I speak? So a mega dungeon, it's not just a big dungeon. Things like the Temple of Elemental Evil or the Caverns of Thracia, they're close. But when we talk about mega dungeons, we're talking about something that can sustain an entire campaign. They're typically going to have 10 or more levels. Some of them go up to 30 levels. Lots of varied ingress and egress in and out of the dungeon and different ways to jump between levels. Very diverse factions and ecologies, societies. In fact, the mega dungeon is so big, it can't be cleared, or it shouldn't be clearable. And this last one's a little subjective, but it needs to tap into this idea of the mythic underworld in some way. The idea being that the laws of the surface don't apply. The mega dungeon isn't trying to simulate some kind of an ecology. The entire environment itself in some way is hostile, and it follows its own logic down there in the depths. Now, this isn't necessarily an attribute of a mega dungeon, but one thing I like about them is that they really support an open style of play. Gary Gygax famously had 6 to 10 players, and any given night, he didn't know who was going to show up. So maybe in the 1970s, that was the first West Marches style of game. But that's what's great about a mega dungeon. As long as you start each session back in town and you end the night back in town, anyone who shows up can explore the dungeon. And there are quite a few examples from history. Let's take a look. The ones back in the 1970s, I'm calling them the primals. We don't have published playable versions of them. We've seen snippets. Some of those authors have shared images of their work. Castle Greyhawk specifically, it was talked about in Dungeon Magazine. We heard about it in the AD&D Player's Handbook and Dungeon Master's Guide. That was the one we all wanted. TSR gave us adventure modules, but the referees from that time period lusted after Greyhawk, and it still has remained elusive, as you'll see on this list. There were some published in the 1990s and early 2000s, but then 2008 is an important inflection point. A couple things happened. First off, 4E was released, and it was really disappointing in some ways to fans of old-time Dungeons and Dragons. It was just a different experience, and people weren't ready for it. So it made a lot of people look backward with fondness to early Dungeons and Dragons. Gary Gygax passed away in 2008, which also triggered a wave of sadness, grief, and nostalgia, and the OGL was out there. And so that was the time period where the OSR blew up. Many people became D&D archaeologists looking back at play styles from the past. And this sort of obsession with the mega dungeon was born. Stonehell is the first one that we see. in a fully published format in 2009. Then you can see all different Megadungeons come out from there. I did mention Castle Greyhawk, though. Trollord Games was working with Gary before he passed in 2008. They had started the project, and it does look like it's been picked up this year. They're calling it Castle Zagig, and it may show up sometime in 2026, a version of Castle Greyhawk. But this video is not about Castle Greyhawk. It's about Stonehell. Tell me more about Stonehell, you may be asking. All right, let's keep going. Stonehell started on the blog of Michael Curtis. You may recognize that name because he's been an author with Goodman Games doing stuff for Dungeon Crawl Classics. I think these days he's a product owner and has continued to work with Goodman Games. But back then, Michael was a blogger. He had a blog called the Society of Torch, Pole, and Rope, which I might add would be a great name for the Adventurers Guild in your campaign. And Stonehell started as sort of theory crafting on his blog and putting some entries out there. And then it came out in 2009, like the first 5 levels, this book, and you kind of see the size of it. It's not super chunky. It's very efficient, we'll say, in terms of the layout. And then the second half of it, level 6 to 10, came out in 2015. But the big question is, okay, what's Stonehell about? Stonehell's concept is a prison. 100 years ago, there's this mad tyrant, the Sterling Potentate. He wants to round up everyone who disagrees with him, all of his dissenters, and throw them in prison. But there's not enough prisons. And he has a mad advisor, the Vizier, who crafts this vision. What if the prison is a dungeon and the prisoners themselves, it's a life sentence when you go there, the prisoners themselves will continue to mine it and carve it and dig deeper. They can build an endless level of, or an endless series of levels for the prison over time. And that's the birth of Stonehell. And so the prisoners, they form their own societies, they create their own religions and cults, and they continue to dig deeper until they run into like the surface, not the surface, the underdark races from deep below, and the two merge, and we have this gigantic dungeon complex. And then the potentate falls from power. The prison's no longer guarded. Many of the inmates stayed there 100 years later. Some of their descendants still live in the depths as cannibals and berserkers and things like that. But other monsters have invaded the dungeon, both from the surface and from underground. And now, because of a growing threat deep in the dungeon, a chaos threat, it threatens the outside world, it threatens the surrounding communities and countryside and things like that. And that's sort of the concept behind Stonehell. Now, when it came out, it was really innovative. Michael did something really interesting with the layout. And so to make sense of it, let's just take a look at a sample level. Okay, here's one of the first levels of Stonehell, level 1A, as it says. And what you can notice right away is in the upper left corner, there's a map. That's this quadrant. And then on this 2-page spread is everything you need to run the dungeon level. Sparse room descriptions, random charts that you might need, random encounters. That's the layout of all of Stonehell. So the idea was you could come to the table as a referee, have everything you need on a single spread in front of you that you just lay out and run directly from the open pages. This was 2008, 2009, long before the virtual tabletop revolution, when people played primarily in person. And we were grasping towards usability at the table. And so one idea was, how do you make everything available to the referee? Now, one of the thoughts with Stonehell, this is just a single quadrant, but the idea was that a level could be more than one quadrant. Let's take a look. This is an example from level 2. You can see there's 4 distinct quadrants, and each one's themed. So this is what drives a lot of the variability and interest in a dungeon like Stonehell. You've got the Asylum, which is mad descendants of the prisoners back in the day. You can see the Reptile House with outdoors, and then the Hobgoblin Redoubt in the bottom corner. And the Hobgoblins, we'll talk about them. They're one of the major threats in the upper levels of the dungeon. And this quadrant view gives you a sense of how Stonehell's constructed. Most levels have 2 or 3 dominant factions that the players can interact with and play off each other. This concept of quadrants carries into the deeper levels, but it's a little different. Let's take a look. So here's an example of one of the deeper levels, level 7. The first thing you notice, it's not 4 quadrants anymore. It's actually 6. So levels 6 to 9 are larger. And the other thing you notice is that there's that chasm in the middle. There's this huge chasm that runs down the center of the dungeon. It allows players that can fly or levitate or have other ways of moving vertically up and down to actually skip levels and get very deep in the dungeon. Kind of provides a bit of a highway of sorts for monsters to move between the levels. So it's a really cool concept. Taking another look or a deeper look at this level 2, you can see in that bottom right-hand corner, there's a whole town there of an underground race called the Vrilya. The deeper levels of this one are really interesting, but especially I love the idea of that chasm that allows sort of fast travel between the different levels. Now, before moving on to talk deeper about what people love about Stonehell, I have to ask you, if you're enjoying my channel and you like this kind of content, please subscribe. It ensures that you won't miss my future videos, helps me grow, and that keeps me on YouTube. Thanks. I appreciate you guys. So what do people love about Stonehell? A couple of things really stand out. First off, it's well reasoned. There's plausible concepts throughout the dungeon, starting with the idea that it's a prison formed by inmates who just continued to dig deeper. And so all the things that they might need to create this underground society, there are tons and tons of factions in Stonehell. And this gives the referee an opportunity to create interesting dynamic play, of course. We'll talk about that a little more on the advice on how to run it. I mentioned already, this was an innovative format. It predated virtual tabletops when people played mostly in person, and we wanted to be able to have everything on a single page. The quadrant is kind of a unique idea. It drives a lot of scale and variety. And one of the OSR's most prolific reviewers, Bryce Lynch, probably a pseudonym, I'll add, rated this one as close to perfect. Certainly one of the best works to come out of the OSR. So that's really high praise for it. However, nothing great exists without some detractors. So what's the other side? Like, what do people who don't like Stonehell say about it? First off, that format, it's either a love it or hate it kind of thing. And actually 1, 2, and 3 are kind of related because Stonehell is sparsely written in order to fit everything in that layout. And so it asks a lot of the referee. You know what? Let me show you a quick example of sparseness and you'll understand exactly where I'm coming from. Okay, here's an example of that quadrant we looked at. We've got 2 rooms here. One is an orc common room. It says there's 6 orcs resting and drinking. But think about what's missing from that sparse description. We don't know. The light situation, the sound, the smells. Do they have furniture? What kind of incidental supplies are in the room? What are they drinking? So that's all stuff that the referee can either prepare before the session or make up on the spot. But it's stuff that you have to have confidence in your ability to improv, maybe put a little extra work in there. We don't have names. Look at the orc captain, for instance. We don't have his name. I can read that description. He's someone who scavenges trophies from his victims, including their skulls. And he's got this like gold armband. So I'm picturing maybe a vainglorious orc captain. Maybe he's got a makeshift mirror and a lamp in his room so that he can kind of like pose and admire himself with all of his trophies. A picture of what the orc commander is like starts to come into my brain, but it's not all laid out. There's no box text here or exhaustive descriptions on what the referee needs to do. This can be challenging, and there's some referees who don't like that. The last two are kind of related too. Back in the early OSR, it was really common to encounter great published works, but that had more primitive production values, or in this case, not a lot of art either. This was the period before Kickstarter, for instance, before people crowdfunded things to then be able to pay for really great art. In fact, like one of the revolutions in tabletop like layout and design was old school essentials. I think that kind of set a high bar for everything that came after. Old school essentials didn't even come out until 2019. So we're talking about an entirely different era of the hobby. So just know that going into it. On the plus side, like these two books are not very thick because of it. You're getting 1,300 rooms, 11 giant dungeon levels at a really economical cost. So I'll put links to Stonehell down below as well. But okay, enough talk about what people love and why some people don't love it so much. I'm assuming you're like me, you want to run it. What do I suggest? First off, this is kind of common sense, but you have to read the books. And honestly, 1, 2, 3, 4 all kind of go together to enable player agency. And this is one of the great things about a Megadungeon, and probably like the number one reason why you want to run one. You as a referee need to become a clue machine, giving your players the information they need to enable their player agency. And one of the ways, or two of the ways you do that is you read the books and then understand how the factions interact with each other. I'll give you a simple, corny example that ties into what we've been talking about. The players are exploring the first dungeon or the first level. They're putting the beat down on the goblins. The goblins, they fail morale checks. They're like, player characters, stop beating up on us. We're just simple goblins trying to make our way in the universe. Who you want are the orcs. They're in a different quadrant. And then the goblins explain to them like why the orcs are a problem. You can imagine a little bit later, the players are beating down the orcs. The orcs are failing the morale check. Oh no, don't attack us, humans. We're just simple orcs trying to make our way in the universe. The real enemies in Stonehell, the ones you need to be concerned about, it's the hobgoblins. They've got this huge treasure down there. They can hire mercenaries. The Hobgoblin King is attracting hobgoblins from all over. They're going to threaten the countryside. They're going to attack the settlement, and so on and so on. And the idea that you as a referee, like you need to understand the interplay of these factions well enough so that as the players meet different humanoids and talk to them, parlay, reaction checks, morale rolls, the whole thing, they're divulging interesting information that's giving the players a reason to go deeper and deeper, either to look for the largest treasure hoards or to quell the dungeon. And that brings me to number 5, what I call the rising threat. Okay, there's this giant mega dungeon in the wilderness. So what? You have to understand like how the mega dungeon is going to affect the wider world. In something like Stonehell, I've mentioned the hobgoblins are like a big threat in the upper levels, but then deeper below that are the mountain trolls. And then there's even more horrible things deeper than that. Things in the dungeon need to affect the wider world, so it's relevant for your campaign. And you do need to be willing to support side quests. Even a varied and large dungeon like Stonehell, it's going to get stale if the players don't have opportunities to like go off in the wilderness, do other quests from time to time, almost like a palate cleanser, and then come back to the mega dungeon later. And then the last thing is make sure you have a home base that's not on top of the dungeon, but close enough that the players can go and come back and go and come back, supporting that open table concept. I've been thinking about this a lot, particularly with relation to Shadowdark. So let's look at some of my ideas for the home base. Steal freely. So what we're looking at is a player's map of the Western Reaches, the Shadowdark campaign that's coming soon. Earlier on this channel, I did a review of Curse Scroll 6, which is the City of Masks. I loved it. I would love to place a campaign where the city is not super close, but the players could return to the city periodically, like once a month or once every couple months. And so I would put Stonehell in the Duchy of Montmar. I would place the Keep on the Borderlands or something similar out on the frontier. And so Stonehell is going to be near the keep, but the city is close enough for the players to go back to and have all the big city intrigue, big city services, and the big city downtime when they want it. But let's zero in on the area around the keep a little bit. So here's a map of what the area is like around the keep on the Borderlands. The big red circle, that's where the Caves of Chaos is. We're going to move that to the side and replace that with Stonehell, but we're looking at Curse Scroll 5 cover, Dwellers in the Deep. I reviewed that one just recently. I loved it. It describes the Shadowdark Deep Earth, like their version of the Underdark, called Morzo Motha. And you get into Morzo Motha through certain cave entrances that take you down into the Underdark. I would love turning the Cave of the Unknown into one of these mythical entrances to Morzo Motha. And so in this way, we're getting ready to do Stonehell, yes, but at least 2 different really cool Curse Scrolls get integrated into the campaign. There's a cool synergy between the Caves of Chaos and Stonehell. I'll show you what I mean. So the bottom map is the Caves of Chaos, and the caves are like a giant ravine with the caves surrounding the ravine, and serendipitously enough, the entrance to Stonehell Dungeon on the top is also a ravine. Back in the day, the armies of the Sterling Potentate had a fortress keeping the valley safe and preventing the prisoners from escaping. The entrance to Stonehell is at the end of the valley. But this kind of a swap feels almost too good to be true, doesn't it? Anyway, next campaign, if we're in the Western Reaches, this is most likely what I'm doing. But you're here for advice on how to run this. Let's talk about some Shadowdark specific advice too. So brief thoughts on converting this. First, treasure. Like a lot of old school stuff, you're going to want to divide the treasure by 10 in order to bring it down into Shadowdark level of assumptions. The good news on monster conversion is this. For levels 1 through 5, the first book, most of these monsters you're going to be able to run them right out of the Shadowdark core book. There wouldn't be too many conversions. And then when you get to levels 6 through 10, there's going to be a lot more conversions coming out of this one. But by then, you've been running Shadowdark and Stonehell for 9 months. First off, you're an experienced referee at that point, and you know what you're doing. And you have a lot of time to get to the point where you have to start converting monsters. I believe in you. The next thing, though, rate of advancement. This one's interesting. So you want to make sure that the Mega Dungeon is giving enough experience that the players can level up and keep pushing deeper. But you also don't want them to have to be completionists and explore everything before they are powerful enough to go down a level. Remember, we've got this mindset that a Mega Dungeon should be too big to clear. So we don't want to encourage that kind of behavior. I actually did a pretty deep analysis of Stonehell and all the treasure. If I do a second video around Stonehell, like a deep dive on really how to run it, maybe I'll include all that work. The short answer is there is enough experience for players to maintain a good rate of advancement, even though like BX D&D and Shadowdark have different assumptions. The one thing I would say is that be liberal about working in experience boons. That's one of the ideas in Shadowdark experience to round it out. And at some point, maybe we'll dive into the charts and go a little deeper on advancement. And then the last thing, this is really a core strength of Shadowdark, the idea that you've got resource management in the dungeon, like managing torches and encumbrance and food. Lean into that. That's one of the things that creates tension and urgency in a Megadungeon, and it's really a core strength of Shadowdark. So I mentioned I ran this back in the day. I did have a good time. We didn't get past book 1 back then. I've got this desire to finish it. It was a kids and dads campaign back in 2012. So neighborhood dads and our sons, who were, I don't know, 10 or 11 at the time. Fast forward to today, the kids are all in college. The dads have never left the table. So I'm playing with the same group for like 15 years now. But Stonehell has stayed at the top of my bucket list because we never really finished it or got into the deep levels. So when I do a Western Reaches campaign, it will be there. In my mind, it's one of the best mega dungeons to fill the void that exists because we never actually got Castle Greyhawk back in the day. So let me know about this video, what you think about it. Think about doing a deeper dive on how to run Stonehell if there's sufficient interest. And if you missed some of those discussions of the other Cursed Scrolls, like how I want to set up my Stonehell campaign with the City of Mass or Dwellers in the Deep, I'll include links to those here. Otherwise, see everyone next time. Thanks for being here.